is a result of the collaboration between ECSECC and NMU. It is really an experiment that seeks to bring together the academic world and the expert in the industry. So for today, we will be having two exciting topics that will be presented by two postdoctoral fellows from Nelson Mandela University. The aim of the dialogue is to fill an important gap that seeks to include empirical evidence in policy development, especially now, given the longevity of the pandemic. Really, the diagnostic of post-COVID challenges and policy response to the crisis. This should be informed not really by guesswork or thumbsuck, but by both evidence-based and science-based empirical studies. So for today, we have two presenters, Dr. Izu, who will be taking us through a sectoral analysis of the impact of digital technology on productivity and employment in the Eastern Cape. And after that, we are going to have a second presenter, Dr. Clement Moyo, who will be talking about human capital development, poverty, and inequality in the Eastern Cape. So, Dr. Izu, you're welcome to start putting your presentation on. And these two postdoctoral fellows were hosted by Prof. Roni and Prof. Mishi from Nelson Mandela University. So we're going to start with the first presentation by Dr. Izu. Over to you, Doctor.
Good morning, colleagues. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. All right. Good morning, colleagues, and thank you for the opportunity to present this exciting paper to you. And by the way of introduction, basically, my name is Dr. Izunna Chima Anyikwa. As Dr. Kambale pointed out, I'm a research fellow from Nelson Mandela University. Okay, basically my presentation is on sectorial analysis of the impact of digital technologies on productivity and the employment in the Eastern Cape. As far as this presentation is concerned, I'm going to focus on the following information. I'm trying to expand the view so that you can be able to view it more broadly. Okay. All right, my presentation is outlined as follows. I'm going to start with introduction, then look at the aims and objective, the research questions, the level of digital intensity, the level of productivity growth in the Eastern Cape, my methodology, then the impact of digital technology on productivity and employment, then discuss the main findings, the emerging views, as well as the recommendations. Okay. Before I start, I wanted us to have a preview of what this particular research is all about. Basically, the view that you are looking at is the heart of digital technology, the global heart of digital technology. A place called Silicon Valley in California is on the south of San Francisco, in California, United States. And if you are looking at this value, it's actually, the place is the headquarters of most of the the technology giants in the world. So if you look at the picture, you see Google, you see YouTube, Facebook, eBay, a lot of them, Yahoo, and so on. Any this big tech company that we know, well-known big tech company in the world, is actually operating from the Silicon Valley. What we actually really don't know is what actually makes the Silicon Valley the uniqueness, or give it the unique position in the world, or in the world of digital technology, is the fact that it's a meeting point between the academics, the private sector, and the government, where they come together to share knowledge, and those knowledge are being translated into action. And that is why today California is the number one, has the number one economy in the United States. Out of the 50 states that make up the United States, California has the highest GDP of 3.1 trillion US dollars. Compare that to South Africa alone. South Africa has a GDP of about 320 billion US dollars in 2020, which is just a tip of the iceberg to compare what is obtainable in the California. California has 3.1 trillion, not even in billion, meaning that California is way more bigger economy, is way more bigger than South African economy. And this is made possible because of the contribution of these high-tech companies to the economy of that state. Okay, now having seen this Silicon Valley is equivalent of what we call the 19th century gold rush in the United States. We remember the gold rush in Johannesburg. But the difference between this Silicon Valley and the previous old gold rush is the issue of we don't actually foresee this ending anytime in future, because of the fact that the economy is actually going into what we call digital economy, whereby the digital technology will play much bigger and bigger role in the global economy. And currently you could see with the issue of COVID and all that, people are working remotely, and is made possible by digital technology. Now, let's look at this study, why this study is important. Basically, in the last 30 years, there has been a lot of development in the global world. Even only few experts could have predicted this development, and those developments is as a result of improvement or advancement in digital technology in the area of information and the communication technology, such as internet, big data, blockchain, 3D printing, cloud computing, and so on. These technologies coming together has brought about emergence of new products, goods, and services in the market, and they have ushered in a new paradigm in economics, which we commonly known today as digital economy. Even in 2019, during the presidential address, the President Cyril Ramaphosa actually set up a commission on the fourth industrial revolution, because of the understanding of the role of this digital technology to the global economy and the South African economy in particular. With that, also there has been a number of studies that have looked at the impact of digital technology on economic performance. And if you look at the few studies that I've given you here, just for you to understand this, that there is a strong relationship between digital technology and the economic performance. Like I also pointed out that in California is number one state in United States in terms of GDP, because of the fact that it houses a lot of big tech giants in the world. They are all there in Silicon Valley, and that's why they are performing very well in terms of GDP growth. However, this particular benefit of digital technology is not automatic. It does not mean that as soon as we adopt digital technology that the benefit will then accrue immediately. It's not automatic. Rather, it requires a policy action both by businesses, organizations, and government to lay out have a formidable plan and a coherent policy framework that will improve the contribution of this technology to economic development. In particular, if you look at Eastern Cape and the South Africa at large, we are actually facing quadruple challenges of slow economic growth, high unemployment rates, poverty, and inequality. And how do we address these problems? And if we are to adopt digital technology, would that be enough for us to address these issues or the challenges that we are facing in this province? Hence, that takes us to the objective of this study. And now we ask this question: what are the objectives of this study? Basically, the aim of this study is to provide policymakers with operational tools to help them better understand the sectorial heterogeneity of digital transformation in the Eastern Cape province and the impact of their impact on productivity and employment. And specific objectives of these studies are: we want to analyze the level of digitalization across sectors and industries in the province. We want to also analyze the level of productivity growth across sectors and the industries in the Eastern Cape. The third one is to estimate the impact of these digital technologies on productivity in different sectors and the different industries within the province. And finally, we estimate the impact of digital technology on employment across different sectors as well as industries in the province. Okay. Based on these specific objectives, I developed 4 key questions that we are going to address in this study. First one is to look at which industries are more digitally intensive and which industries are less digitally intensive. That's the opposite of that question. The second one is to look at what is the level of productivity across industries in the province. Then the third question is to look at the effect of digital technology on productivity. And lastly, we look at the effect, what are the effects of digital technology on employment across industries in the province. These 4 questions are what, at the end of this study, you will be able to appreciate how we are able to address these 4 key questions. Let's start by looking at issue of digital intensity. In other words, the level of digitalization in the Eastern Cape. To consider that level of digitalization in the Eastern Cape, basically, we used 2 indicators of digital intensity. First indicator is what we call the ratio of ICT investment to non-residential gross fees capital formation. The second indicator is the ratio of ICT investment to number of people employed in a given sector. Okay, looking at the figure A, which consider the ratio of ICT investment to non-residential gross fees capital formation, you'll be able to see that across the primary and the secondary sector, primary, secondary, and the tertiary sector, over 3 periods, from 1993 to 2000, from 2001 to 2010, and from 2011 to 2019. If you look at how the level of digital intensity has grown from this period, from one period to another, in the recent time, you can see that the level of digitalization has increased across all the sectors. However, you can see that level of digitalization in the secondary and the tertiary sector is quite high compared to that of primary sector. This means that primary sector is less digitally intensive. Also, if you look at based on indicator, the second indicator in panel B, you see that the ratio of
I was canceling something here. Okay,
is the ratio of ICT to employment. You could see that again there is also a progressive increase in the level of digitalization over the 3 periods that under consideration. And you could also see again that the primary sector remains the least digitalized sector of the economy, while the secondary and the tertiary sector are more digitally intensive. Hence, it means that over the period that most businesses have started adopting a lot of digital technology in their production process across board. However, most primary sector businesses operating in the primary sector are less digitally intensive, in the sense that the rate of their adoption of digital technology is very low. Now, let's look at this at industrial level. Looking at the industrial level, it's actually depict the similar trend that we saw at the aggregate level, which is the sectorial level. At industrial level, if we compare the same 3 periods, using the first indicator of ICT to non-residential gross fixed capital formation, you will see that 2011 to 2019 show a huge increase compared to period 1993 to 2000. And of particular notice is the increase in trade industry, which the level of the trade industry, which the level of digitalization has increased to 14%. Then the finance sector, the manufacturing sector, 14%. The finance sector, 12.6%. So if you look at this, that shows you that these industries are becoming more digitalized. If you also compare it with the second indicator, the outcome is equally the same. You will see that the transport industry, the electricity industry, the manufacturing, finance, and so on, they equally shows that the level of digitalization has grown over the period. But what comes across from this analysis is that businesses in the province have started to adopt digital technology in their operations. And if you look at recently with the lower price of data, with rollout of broadband, like the fiber to the house program that is being done by Telkom over it started around early 2011, 2000 or thereabout. It shows how this has been, digital intensity has grown in the past 10 years. And that shows you the direction of economy in terms of productivity approach, whereby productivity will be much dominated in future. The productivity level will be much dominated by using using digital technology. Now, let's move on to the second aspect, is to look at productivity growth. The second aspect of our analysis, having seen the level of digitalization across sectors and the industry within the province. Now let's look at what is the level of productivity in the Eastern Cape. And again, we use 2 indicators. I constructed the first indicator is level productivity index, and the second one is multi-factor productivity index. In the first index, that is the figure A, we could see that since 2007, since the end of the global financial crisis, the level of productivity in the secondary and the tertiary sector have remained relatively the same, though with a little decline over the period. Okay, and if that means that the rate of productivity growth have a kind of stalled in both sectors since the end of global financial crisis. The second part is, if you look at productivity level in the primary sector, you see there is a huge increase towards the end of the global financial crisis. But however, since 2013, there has been a declining declining growth in the level of productivity in the primary sector. Particularly, this declining growth rate in the primary sector can be attributed to 3 factors. One is the issue of the ongoing drought that the province has been experiencing in the last 5 to 6 years. That drought is actually affecting productivity. Remember, most businesses in the primary sectors are mainly agricultural and the mining and all that. The second factor responsible for that is the declining global commodity prices, which has actually reduced a lot of productivity in the sector, affect most of the commodity, the mining sectors and that. and all that. And the third factor is low economic growth is actually another factor that's attributed that is being attributed to this declining productivity in the primary sector. Now, when we consider this productivity growth in terms of multi-factor productivity, if you look at multi-factor productivity, which takes into account all the factors of production, including the labor, including the machines, the equipment, everything that goes into production function or production process, you see that since end of global financial crisis, productivity level has declined across board. However, it is more pronounced in the primary sector, which reflects again this effect of drought, declining global commodity prices, and the low economic growth that we are currently experiencing in South Africa and the Eastern Cape in particular. Now, let's look at this again in terms of productivity level across industries. Using the same index, you could see again, if you compare the 3 periods that we've been using, we see that if you compare 2011 to 2019 with productivity level during the period of 1993 to 2000, you could see there is a huge decline across industries. For instance, if you look at labor productivity index, you see that in the mining sector, in 1993 to 2000, the index point is 122.3, but in 2011 to 2019 period is just 104.9. This means there is a decline of about 18 index points. If you look at check other industries, you experience such decline. That's which again is consistent with what we observed when we consider the aggregate, the sectorial labor productivity level. Similarly, if you look at multi-factor productivity in the index, you see again similar pattern that we observe under labor productivity index. You notice that if you compare productivity level in 1993 to 2000 and that of 2011 to 2019, you will realize that there is a huge decrease. There is a huge decrease across virtually in all the industries. That again tells us something, that our productivity level has not been increasing, and what could be the forces behind this? Now, because of this decrease in productivity level, we then go further to estimate what does digital technology contribute to productivity growth in the Eastern Cape. To do that, we look at, basically we employ two methodology, one approach using two different functions. The first one, in exploring this impact of digital technology on productivity and the economy, on the employment, we used two approach: the multi-factor productivity production function, which uses a number of inputs as determinants of production, then labor demand function, and we use the ARDL model, which is the autoregressive distributed lag model, to estimate each of these functions using data from 1993 to 2019. All right. Okay. Based on because of time, I don't want to I didn't provide every details. If you want more details on the estimations and all that, if you read the actual document, you'll be able to see the estimations and how the estimate, the methodology and how it was estimated. And here, because of time, I presented only the long-term impact. The short-term impact is left in the documents just for, if you have interest to read the actual document, you can just read through it, and that will help you to understand more on this. But to preview this estimation, the long-term impact of digital technology on labor productivity, and my focus on this analysis will be on the impact of digitalization. Hence, I'm going to focus on the first row, On the first row, if you look at the impact of digitalization at sectorial level, the impact is not significant, meaning that actually it has a limited effect. However, at industrial levels, we could see that it has effect in some industries, while in some others, the effect is not significant. But let's start, for example, by looking at the agricultural industry. If you look at the estimation for agricultural industry, you see that digital technology actually contributes 0.08% to productivity growth in the sector. What does this mean? This means that if we increase the level of digitalization in agricultural sector by 1%, is going to contribute about 0.08% to productivity growth in the sector. However, if you look at manufacturing sector, actually the impact on the manufacturing or the contribution in the manufacturing sector is negative in the sense that it actually reduces productivity in the manufacturing sector. And somebody might be wondering how. I will explain that in due time. Okay, in the manufacturing sector, you see that the digitalization actually reduced productivity growth by 0.05%. The same applies to electricity industry. Then if you look at transport industry, it actually increases productivity level by 0.6%. While in the finance and the personal services, the contribution is negative. What this means when the contribution is negative, it means that if you increase your investment in digital technology, it's going to reduce productivity. But when the impact is positive, it means that if you increase your investment in digital technology, it's going to contribute to the growth of that industry. Now, in order for us to understand more this estimate, I've actually provided a brief analysis so that you'll be able to understand clearly the contribution of this digital technology, both in the short run and in the long term, using 2019 as our baseline. Okay, based on our baseline estimation, okay, we estimate that the contribution of digital technology in agricultural industry in 2019, based on that, it will increase productivity by 2,533 rand in the short term, while in the long term, it's going to increase productivity by 2,572 rand in the long term. In electricity industry, the contribution of digital technology is about 10,600 rand in the short term, while in the long term, it will reduce productivity by 33,000 rand. This is possible because if you look at the power outages, load sheddings, and all that, that actually fits into the productivity level in the sector. And that we expect that it will have a negative effect. Then in construction industry, you see that the contribution of digital technology is going to reduce the productivity by 8,583 rand. Then in the transport sector, the reduction is in the transport sector, the increase in productivity level is about 55,555 rand. In the short term, in the long term, you see that the increase is about 23,288 rand. Then in the finance, in the long term, is going to reduce productivity by 44,000 rand approximately. Similarly, is going to reduce productivity in the personal service sector by 1,300 rand approximately in the short term, and the 3,683 rand in the long term. Okay, now just to clarify some of the estimation and the why, because if you look at some of the people expectation are that digital technology will automatically translate into productivity. This is not actually the case. Okay, there are three reasons for that. One is that sometimes firms may invest in digital technology for purposes that are not directly connected to productivity target. In other words, they are not investing for the purpose of actually increase their productivity, and in which case that investment will not translate into productivity growth. Okay. The second one is that there is a situation whereby the investment in the digital technology is for the purpose of just replacing or substituting existing production process just for a matter of convenience. By doing so, that will not translate into productivity. And the third factor is a situation whereby the businesses are investing an insufficient amount. When they are investing an insufficient amount in digital technology, that might not actually translate to growth. At the same time, we can think of what about the skills of those people in using those technologies into converting it towards increased productivity. If the skills are not there, we should expect that. These are some of the reasons behind that might lead to negative contribution of digital technology to productivity. Now let's move further on the effect on employment. Having seen the effect of digital technology on productivity, let's look at the effect on employment. Based on our estimate, okay, on the understanding of the theory behind this, if you recall, economic theory made it clearly that the technology has double impact on employment. The technology can be complementary to employment, and at the same time, it can serve as a substitute to labor. And in a situation whereby there is complement, it actually increases the number of employment. But a situation whereby a technology is serving as a substitute for labor in production, it's actually going to reduce the number of people employed in that sector. Hence, as far as technology is concerned, we face this issue of both substitution effect and the job creation effect. And if you look at this estimate in table 5, the long-term impact of digital technology, you will appreciate that we actually run into those two aspects of technology. In some sectors and the industries, we experience employment growth, while in some other sectors, we experience decline in employment as a result of digitalization. Let's consider each of them. If you're looking at the sectorial level, you can look at the tertiary industry. In the tertiary industry, you could see that digitalization actually reduces the number of employment. In other words, if we increase the amount of digitalization in the sector by 1%, the level of employment in the sector will decrease by 0.145%. That is the effect of digitalization on employment in the sector. Then if we look at the mining sector, the digitalization actually contributes about 0.25% increase in the employment in the sector. The same in the manufacturing sector, whereby it contributes about 0.06%. Then if you look at electricity sector, also it contributes to 0.09% to employment in the sector. However, in the construction industry, you see that the employment level actually decreases by 0.12%. The same in the transport sector, whereby the level of employment actually decreases by 0.18%. In finance sector, you can see that it actually contributes about 0.91% increase in employment. Okay. Also, if you look at the general government as well as personal services, digital technology actually reduces the level of employment in these industries. What does this imply? Let's look at how this plays out, this estimate. If you look at table 6, look at the contribution of digital technology to employment. How many workers would digital technology contribute, or how many jobs would digital technology reduce in each sectors and industry? If you look at the short term, in the primary sector, it will contribute about 24,600 jobs. But in the tertiary sector, it's going to reduce employment by about 54,710 jobs. If you look at in the electricity sector industry, that is only 128 jobs will be created by digital technology. Then transport sector, employment will fall by 2,054 jobs will disappear as a result of that in the short term. Also, we can look, the same interpretation goes for the long term. If you look at in the tertiary sector, is about 14,300 jobs will be lost as a result of digital adoption in the long term. Then in the mining sector is going to increase employment by 451 jobs. Then manufacturing sector, you see about 6,155 jobs will be created by digital technology. This is based on 2019 baseline data. Based on our estimate, we then estimate these effects based on 2019 as our baseline. Okay, having seen all these impacts, the question now is, let's look at the main finding. If you remember at the beginning, we posed 4 key questions, and the answers to those questions actually emerged from these those analyses that we've been done so far. First one is that from our analysis in terms of how much digitalization is taking place in the Eastern Cape, and is it the same across sectors? Basically, we see that the level of digitalization has grown across board. However, there is some heterogeneity. There is no uniformity in terms of the level of digitalization. Some sectors are more digitalized than others, and some industries are more digitalized than others. That heterogeneity must be taken into account in any policy that is going to be introduced. Then the second question we posed is the issue of the level of productivity in the Eastern Cape. And we could see that level of productivity in Eastern Cape has declined in recent time. Across industries and the sectors, we experienced that there is a declining productivity level. Then with that, we look at the impact of digital technology on productivity. And based on our analysis, you could see that the impact of digital technology is limited with few exceptions. And at the same time, if our results also show that there are complementary effects that needs to be taken into account when making any policy, such as looking at the impact of capital to labor ratio that we use, combination of capital and the labor that we use in production, human capital, unit labor cost, trade openness, they all contribute to productivity growth. And lastly, our findings show that digital technology actually contributes to both employment growth and the job destruction in different sectors, depending on the dynamics that exist in a given sector. Some sectors might be experiencing what we call scale effect. Scale effect is effect of when a technology is introduced that actually reduces the price of the product, which leads to increase in demand for such product and hence increase in employment of labor. But in some industries are experiencing what we call substitution effect, especially if you look at something like compare the results under manufacturing sector, transport sector, finance, and the electricity. If you compare the results under employment and the productivity, you will actually appreciate that actually indeed scale effect exists as well as substitution effects exist in these sectors. Finally, we consider the emerging views from the literature. What are the emerging views? The emerging views from the literature is that there has been a declining productivity globally in a number of countries, particularly in OECD countries. A number of studies have highlighted that, and that has led to what we call productivity paradox by Slow, 1987. And this productivity paradox is stating that there is much of digital technology, particularly ICT, has been growing, but the effect has not translated into productivity growth in a number of countries. Hence, this productivity paradox. The second point that has been emerged in the literature is the issue of labor market disruption as a result of adoption of digital technology. And that is making that adoption of digital technology has both job creation and job destruction effect. However, everything will be dependent on the aggregate effect on the employment or in the economy will be dependent on the policy framework that is used. The third emerging point is that for technology or digital technology to realize their benefit, there is need to invest in the to have an investment in the to have a complementary investment in other type of investment such as research and development, skill development, and even the organizational structure to ensure what they call co-innovative process, whereby not only adopting technology but also making sure that the organization has the skill and the organization design is well developed in order to benefit from this technology. And lastly, the issue of human capital, which again goes back to the issue of skill development. Then, based on this analysis and the results, the key recommendations that emerge from these results are in two. Okay, the first one, we talk about that public policy should jointly promote the use of digital technology, organizational change, and the training of employers and the employee. And to do that, there is need to promote the adoption of digital technology by supporting both financial, by providing both financial and non-financial support, particularly non-financial support, which is in form of training capacity. Then the second one is encouraging digital skill through development of encouraging digital skill development to enable technology diffusion. In other words, without the skill, having the skilled laborers that can make use of these technologies, automatically that will not translate into productivity and that will not create the efficient job because there is a need for efficiency in the use of this technology. The next one is supporting innovation through collaboration between academics, business, and the government. If you remember my points when we looked at the Silicon Valley, what makes that Silicon Valley the unique position in the US economy is because of the fact that academics, business sector, governments come together in that area and share value, share ideas. And by sharing their, even governments give them support, protection in order for them to bluster. And that's why most of these digital technology have, or these companies that operate in Silicon Valley, they have grown to be dominant globally. You can think of Google, you can think of Twitter, you can think of Facebook, and so on. They are dominating globally. In fact, the way they behave is more like a monopoly because the market is kind of saturated by this big tech. Okay, then the next point is the issue of reducing barriers to the growth of innovative businesses by promoting business dynamism. Business dynamism actually improves the agility of the business to adapt to changing economic circumstances. As we are moving to fourth industrial revolution, there is a need for business to be agile in terms of being forward-looking and also proactive in adapting to the changing business environment. They can only do that if they have the required skill and the required human capital, and they are well-trained to be able to adapt to these changes. That will actually help to mitigate any negative impact of digital technology, particularly when people are losing jobs. Do they have a better skill that will help them to move from one employment to another? This is very important. Then we look at the second policy recommendation, which says that public policy should be designed to promote digitalization with consideration of other determinants of co-innovative productivity. And what do we mean by that? Digital technology alone cannot bring about benefit, except if there is adequate investment in other digital infrastructure, like the issue of broadband, auctioning the broadband spectrum and all that, which has been in the court for the past 3, 4, 5 years. Then other types of investment, such as investing in human capital, developing the capacity of the universities and the academic institution of learning to be able to understand how they can be integrated within the business community to develop ideas that can filter through to the in the province. Then the next one is public policy should promote the internationalization of products and services that businesses operating in the province produce for local markets, because international competition introduce efficiency enhancement mechanisms. What this means is that there is a need for support for our local businesses to be able to access international market, especially now most businesses have gone online. Platform businesses is flourishing in this era of COVID. People need to understand, especially local manufacturers need to be able to access this international market in order for them to produce. And lastly, reduce the financial constraint on new businesses through equity financing by government, encouraging venture capitals. That should be the avenue to help, especially the startup businesses in the province, to be able to grow and flourish. With this, I've come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Izu, for this powerful presentation on the impact of digital technology on productivity and employment in the Eastern Cape. Really, through the presentation, I think the province should be concerned about the declining multi-factor productivity index that is taking place in the province. I think we need to work a lot on that. And please write down your questions, and after the second presentation, participant will be allowed to ask questions. You'll be indicating whether your question is for the first presenter or the second presenter. Now, I think we're going to move to the second presentation by Dr. Clement Moyo, Clement, who will take us through the human capital development, poverty, and inequality in a province. And as I indicated, the question will be at the end of this second presentation. Over to you, Dr. Clement Moyo. And I take this opportunity to welcome our CEO, Musana, you are welcome. And also to welcome the host, Professor Mishi, you are welcome. Over to you, Dr. Clement Moyo.
Okay, morning everyone. Hopefully you can all hear me. Can I please get a shout before I start?
Yes, we can hear you clearly. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay, thank you.
An hour, then we'll have questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay. So yeah, okay, my name is Dr. Clement Moyo. So I'll be presenting on the study of human capital development, poverty, and inequality in the Eastern Cape. So as my previous colleague mentioned, yeah, I'm also part of the post-doctoral research fellows at the Nelson Mandela University. So yeah, get going with my presentation. So the outline of the presentation is as follows. I'll introduce the topic, and then I'll discuss an overview of human capital, poverty, and inequality in the Eastern Cape. Then from there, I'll provide my empirical analysis. Then I'll provide conclusions and recommendations at the end. So as my previous colleague has outlined the issue around digital technology, you know, despite the successful transition into democracy in South Africa, you know, a substantial proportion of the population still remain trapped in poverty, and inequality levels still remain very high. You know, skills development and education have been, earmarked as tools to achieve some of these socio-economic goals. So, as you know, we are faced by, the quadruple challenges in South Africa and also in the Eastern Cape at large of high unemployment, low economic growth, high inequality levels, and poverty levels also being high. So, over time, we've seen in the National Development Plan and also in the Provincial Development Plan of the Eastern Cape that skills development and ensuring, that the citizenry is educated is one of the most important, tools that we use to ensure that we achieve some of the socio-economic goals that we're facing. So, there's been a significant amount of expenditures in education and health, especially. If we look at spending on learning and culture in 2021, the budget that was read this year, 2021 to 2022, we see that the allocation to learning and culture is about 402.9 billion. And if we look at the provincial budget, we see that 35.1 billion has been allocated to education. So the effect of human capital, as you can see, human capital is viewed as a very important tool to achieve those socio-economic goals. And now with technological developments taking place, human capital is now at the center stage. Low individuals with low levels of human capital, may find it difficult to participate in the economy. And that has been one of the major challenges that we faced in South Africa and also in the Eastern Cape, in that, the inclusivity, the economy has not been in a way we would want it to be. So many individuals are excluded from participating in the economy, and that has, perpetuated poverty levels as well as inequality. So the key question here will be whether human capital or education attainment, can that lead to, can that help us to achieve some of these socio-economic goals? Okay, so in the previous slide, I mentioned the significant amount of expenditures that have been made on education, for example, but however, those significant expenditures have not really translated into commensurate returns, if we put it that way. We're seeing in high school education, there's been low progression of students in the further education and training phase that represents your grades 10 to 12. So many students drop out of education at that level, and one of the reasons, of course, is lower levels of basic education, and there are other reasons as well, such as loss of incomes, for example, and some feeling that education is not going to help them and dropping out of school. But the low quality of basic education is one of the major determinants, and this actually hinders the attainment of tertiary education, which remains a vital tool in which we can ensure that people participate in the economy. So just to provide a bit of background around productivity and quality of education in South Africa. So the World Bank states that the productivity of a child born in South Africa in 2020 is estimated to be about 43%. And the quality adjusted years of education is around 5.6 years, compared to the unadjusted level of about 10.2 years. So the low quality of human capital, as you can see here with that 5.6 years compared to the unadjusted figure of 10, is one of the major issues that we're currently facing. And this is is a hindrance to the achievement of the socio-economic goals that we're facing in South Africa. And going further forward, we've seen how the COVID-19 pandemic, has affected our economies. Going further forward, the issue of human capital, is going to be important, especially as well with digitalization that is coming up. Human capital levels or education, is going to play a much bigger role in how we're able to recover from this pandemic. So there are a few, research questions that I'll seek to answer with the study. So the purpose of the study, first and foremost, is to examine the relationship between human capital, poverty, and inequality. The three research questions that I would like to answer here will be: does human capital development contribute to reduction in inequality and poverty levels? Okay, it's one of the very important questions that we need to answer. We're seeing these expenditures in education. We've seen an increase in education attainment over time, but the key question now is, will these lead to lower levels of inequality and poverty levels? Or maybe, is there other factors that are driving this inequality and poverty? The second research question that I would like to look at is whether the effect of human capital on poverty is dependent on inequality. Okay, recent studies and literature have shown that the effect of human capital on poverty is dependent to a large extent on inequality. So with higher levels of inequality, it's quite possible that fewer individuals will be able to access quality education. And as a result, we see an increase in human capital in the country, but however, poverty levels will still remain low because it's only a few select who are able to access, quality education. So, and as a result, what happens is those who receive the lower quality education are not really able to participate much in the economy. There are fewer opportunities that are available for them to take up. So as the economy even improves and more jobs are created, it's mostly just going to benefit the few select. So inequality is a major determinant of how human capital may impact on poverty. Then at the end, I will also look briefly at what are the determinants or drivers of human capital development. What are the determinants for what? Please mute. Yeah, the sound is just very disruptive. Please mute. Okay. Okay, before I provide an overview of human capital and poverty and inequality in the Eastern Cape, I would just like to provide a few definition of terms. Okay, so with regards to human capital, I'll be looking at the years of education. Okay, so the measure that I'm using here is one that is used by UNESCO. Okay, it's the mean years of education, the average years of education of the population aged 25 and above. It's one of at this stage, I would say it's the best measure of how educated a particular population is. And I've not incorporated health into the analysis. The reason being is we don't have too many good measures of health. The only measures of health that we have at the moment are just your life expectancy, for example, and they're very, very difficult to incorporate into the analysis. So I'm just going to focus mostly on education attainment, and I will not incorporate the health aspect. Poverty in this case, is represented by the percentage of the population earning an income below the poverty line. Okay, so we have the lower poverty line, which is 840 rands, and the upper poverty line, which is 1,268. So I'll use both measures in my analysis. Then inequality is measured by what we call the Gini index or the Gini coefficient. It's a measure of income distribution in a particular area, could be in economy in South Africa as a whole or in the different provinces. The index takes values of between 0 and 1. So basically, yeah, if inequality is high, then the index will be much closer to 1. In South Africa, overall our index is much closer to 0.7. Also in the Eastern Cape, the figure is closer to 0.7 in the Eastern Cape. So in South Africa, it's around 0.65. So which is pretty closer to the unequal level of 1. So if inequality is 1, basically it means all the income is earned by one person, for example. And then if the Gini index is 0, then it means there's equal distribution of income. Okay, so the closer you get to 1, it suggests that inequality levels are very high. Okay, so I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of human capital in the Eastern Cape, and from then on, I'll go on to discuss an overview of poverty and inequality. So if you look at the Eastern Cape, this is just a plot of the average years of education, as I've mentioned, over time from 1993 to 2019. So as you can see, there's been there's an increase in average years of education of the population aged 25 and above. So you can see in the early 90s, it was about 6 years, average of 6 years of education. And in 2019, we're seeing a figure just below 8 years of education. Okay. However, when you look at, this plot here doesn't paint a good picture. There's so many aspects that are concealed by this trend here. Okay, and one of the major aspects that is concealed, as I'll show in the next slide, is that there's so much heterogeneity in how human capital. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that there are differences between the districts and the metros in the Eastern Cape. If you look at your metros, Nelson Mandela Bay, and of course Buffalo City, that's BUF there, and NMB, Nelson Mandela Bay, the average years of education from 93 to 2019 is about 9 years of education. Okay, 9 years of education, and for Buffalo City is about 8.41. Okay, then we also have Katatu, which is also one of most high performing district with human capital mean years of education is around 7.16. But if you look at the other districts, you see that the levels of education, or average years of education for the population aged 25 and above, we see it's just about below 6 for them. Okay, so this suggests that this heterogeneity is quite important. We need to look at some of the more rural provinces, or sorry, not provinces, but the more rural districts. Your Alfred and Zoe and Amatole, and Chris Honey, you can see they also have high poverty levels, as I'm going to show in the next slide. So there could be a link between years of schooling and also poverty. Okay, another thing that I would like to mention before I go ahead around human capital in the Eastern Cape. This plots here at times also don't reveal the issue of inequality in education. Okay, so be mindful that there's income inequality, which I will talk about later on, but there's also inequality in terms of our education system. There's a substantial proportion of the population that are only able to access poor, low quality education. Okay, and that is most of the time not revealed by the data that we actually use. So if you look at the Eastern Cape, based on Stats SA has shown that the Eastern Cape has very low levels of education, and the education system is highly unequal. In the Eastern Cape, there's a significant number of no-fee schools, very low, which have very low levels of quality. The issues around the availability of teachers there, availability of textbooks and so forth, those are the issues that have been raised by most students who go to the no-fee schools, which are more prevalent in the Eastern Cape compared to the other provinces in South Africa. And it's been shown by studies that students from these no-fee schools actually perform way worse compared to those from the fee-paying schools. So the issue of inequality of education is concealed to a large extent by some of the data. And if we look at the Eastern Cape as well, another important statistic is that in the Eastern Cape, the percentage of students or individuals aged 5 and above who attend education institutions, it's about 92%, which is one of the highest in South Africa. Okay, it's 92%. But however, when we get to the tertiary level, and also the enrollments in TVET colleges, actually the Eastern Cape is the lowest number of individuals who enroll for higher education institutions. So as you can see, at the lower end of the scale, we have the highest number of individuals who enroll in basic education and so forth. But as we go further to tertiary education, now it turns around with the lowest number of individuals who are able to enroll in higher education. So, which is a suggestion that there's a significant amount of dropouts in between, and that could be attributed, of course, to issues around poverty levels, and also the quality of education also needs to be taken into account. Okay. Looking at poverty in the Eastern Cape, this basic trend of the upper and lower poverty line, they followed sort of a similar trend. We saw a decline from the early 2000s in poverty levels as the economy started improving. We had that high economic growth between 2004 and 2007. where we saw that decline in the percentage of the population who are living below a particular poverty line. Then, however, from the years 2011 to 2011 all the way to 2018, we've seen that there's now a bit of an upward trend in poverty levels, and that can be attributed to the performance of the economy. The economy has not been performing too well. Economic growth has been low, and as a result, job opportunities have been limited and unemployment levels continuing to rise. What we've seen here is that poverty levels have started to creep up a bit. And, with COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic having hit us, it's expected that the poverty levels are going to increase even further. And if we break down, the effect of the poverty lines in the Eastern Cape, we can see that, as I mentioned, I provided this breakdown of your metros and, of course, your districts. If we look at Buffalo City, Nelson Mandela Bay and Tsatatu, these areas here have higher economic activity, and you can see poverty levels are much lower for these three areas compared to the other districts. As you can see, Alfred Nzo, Amatole, and Chris Hani, they actually have one of the highest poverty rates in the whole of South Africa. So these districts are one of the most poorest in South Africa as a whole. As you can see, with regards to the upper poverty line, over 80% in some of the districts, 80% of the people earning an income below the upper bound poverty line, which is, remember, was just above 1,200 a month. Okay, so we see this heterogeneity again with regards to poverty levels. Okay, as we did with education. Okay, so and if you compare, you can see there's some relationship here. Provinces which have higher levels of education seem to have lower, the areas with higher levels of education, that way your Buffalo City, Tatatu, and Nelson Mandela Bay, we see that they have lower levels of poverty. Okay, and in most cases it's might be also due to the fact that there's high economic activity, but also, education plays a particular role there, which we need to investigate. And then if you look at inequality in the province, you can see how inequality has trended. I've provided here a plot of inequality and also a plot of GDP in the economy. Okay, so the inequality is represented by these bars, which are, I could say they're maroon, and then GDP is this blue line, blue plot. As you can see here, inequality levels have fluctuated to a large extent. You've seen increases and declines during certain periods. Then over the last few years, we're seeing inequality starting to increase in the Eastern Cape. And as I mentioned, around 2019, inequality was close to 0.7. Okay, so 0.7 is pretty high. And inequality is one of the highest in South Africa as a whole. It's one of the highest in the world. Okay, so it's one of the highest in the world. At some point, it was just behind Brazil. So you'd expect that it's definitely one of the top 5 countries with the most unequal distribution of income. And an important relationship that we're seeing here, and also it's a bit of a puzzle, is the relationship between GDP and inequality measured, as I said, by the Gini index. As you can see here, in periods where inequality is lower, it corresponds to a period where GDP is also lower. Which is one of the, it's a bit of a puzzle. You expect when the economy is improving that more people will be able to have more opportunities and more people will be able to find jobs. And as a result, that may reduce inequality. But however, this is suggesting something a bit different. It's suggesting that, when GDP is improving, as you can see here, I mentioned this part here around our economy was doing well around the early 2000s all the way to 2007. As you can see, inequality started increasing sharply as GDP was also increasing. So, this attests to, opportunities. Economy is not inclusive at all. As the economy is improving, job opportunities, are only available to a few select proportion of the population. The majority of the population are not able to access these opportunities, and at the end of the day, improvements in GDP, they're not really being translated into, improvements in inequality. Okay, although these trends, as I said, they don't. Okay, I haven't said it, but these trends here don't show any causal relationship. These are basically just trends. So it shows that there could be a factor that is impacting on these trends here. Okay, and as I said, one of the factors that I believe is driving these trends is the issue of the economy not being inclusive, and also human capital may have a role to play in this regard. And to further emphasize the point around how inequality and economic activity are related, if you see here, the areas which have higher levels of economic activity, such as your Buffalo City, you have Tsatsatu, and also Nelson Mandela Bay, you can see that inequality is actually higher for those areas. Okay, so if you take the average of inequality from 1993 all the way up until 2019, you can see inequality is slightly higher in these areas with high economic activity. So which also shows that it links to the previous trends, which I showed on the previous slide. So of course, as I mentioned, doesn't really suggest any causal effect, but there are underlying issues that need to be taken into account, the inclusivity of the economy, and also the issues around human capital. Okay, so which is the focus of this particular study. So in moving on to the empirical analysis, I'm going to be estimating three equations. So the first one looks at the effect of human capital on poverty. And I also included a few control variables, which are not necessarily they're not a major part of the analysis. So I'm not going to dwell too much on the control variables. And also the effect of human capital on inequality. And the third equation will look at the determinants of human capital. What do we need in order to enhance human capital in the Eastern Cape? The study adopted the panel data approach. Given the amount of data that we have, data from 93 to 2019 is a bit short. The researcher, I tried to do an analysis with just time series data, but it didn't show, adequate results, which is mostly due to the short time period. So I decided to adopt the panel approach to the analysis. So I used a technique called the pooled mean group, PMG. Then I also used a particular technique known as the panel threshold technique. So the panel threshold technique will help us to answer, as I said, the second research question. If you recall, I wanted to investigate whether, the effect of human capital on poverty, is it determined by inequality? Does high levels of inequality, perpetuate the issue of poverty? Okay, so you may find in most cases, as I said, there's high levels of inequality, then enhancements of poverty, an increase in human capital may not actually have much of an impact on poverty. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to provide a summary of the results. As you can, there's a document that I submitted with all the major estimations. So that document is available upon request if someone wants to go deeper into the analysis. For the presentation, for this presentation, I'm just going to outline just a few results. Okay, so what the results are showing us in this case is that if an extra year of education of the population aged above 25. So an extra year, so if education maybe is around 8, if proportion of the population aged above 25 has an education that is an extra year of education of that population will lead to a reduction in poverty levels by about 5.53%. If you're looking at the lower poverty line, and if you use the upper bound poverty line, it's about 3.26%. So that translates to about 378,100 people being taken out of poverty if there's an increase in the amount of education. So an extra year of education of the population as a whole will reduce poverty levels by about 378,100 for the upper bound poverty line. And if you use the lower bound, it's about 228,200. Okay, so what this analysis is showing us here is how that education is quite vital for reductions in poverty. And as you've seen, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there's been significant increase in school dropout rates in the Eastern Cape. The Education NEC announced that about 130,000 students in the Eastern Cape who dropped out of school in 2020. And if you look at the year 2021, figures are also quite frightening. The whole of South Africa, it's estimated by a study by the NEEDS CREM, it's estimated that close to about 750,000 students could have dropped out of school due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So what this will do is, in most cases, may reduce years of education are reduced, and what will end up happening is poverty will be perpetuated in the long term. So this is something that needs to be sorted out in this short term, because it will have very long-term repercussions for poverty levels in the Eastern Cape. And other two important variables that I thought I should discuss, the issue of electricity access and also unemployment. You see that a 1% increase in electricity access, that means basically the number of people who are able to access electricity, that actually reduces poverty by about 0.15%. So if maybe 12,000 more people are able to access electricity, that will reduce poverty by about 10,500. Okay, so electricity access is quite vital for poverty levels. As you can see, the Eastern Cape is the lowest electricity access levels from a provincial perspective, which is around 82%. In the other provinces at much higher levels. Okay, so you need to see an improvement in electricity access. Especially now looking at how there's going digital learning taking place with improvements in technology. Electricity access is going to be quite vital, especially for the the rural districts that we have in the province. So, this will actually enhance levels of human capital and may reduce poverty levels. Yeah. And also, if you look at unemployment, a 1 percentage point increase in unemployment, that is roughly about 23,140, actually raises poverty by about 28,000, which is about 0.4%. Okay, as we saw the grim figures around unemployment, which were reported just recently for the second quarter of 2021. Unemployment in the Eastern Cape is said to be about 47.1%. And if you take the expanded definition of unemployment, it's well over 50%. So, unemployment will perpetuate poverty levels in the economy. So it's quite vital that we try and ensure that people are able to participate in the economy. Participation in the economy is quite vital. Then if we look at the effect of human capital on inequality, the results here, you can see the results are going to be a bit of a shocker. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that an increase in education or increase in human capital actually is associated with higher levels of inequality. Okay, so you can if we look at our data in the overview, we've seen that human capital levels have been on the rise in the Eastern Cape. Okay, but however, inequality levels also continue to increase. Okay, so this is a finding that is not in line with what we'd expect, and it's not in line with given that human capital is earmarked as one of the tools to reduce inequality. But what we're seeing here is that an increase in years of education actually is associated with higher levels of inequality. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier on, the explanation for this could be the issue around low quality education. Okay, so our education system is highly unequal, and as a result, as I said, significant portion of the population are only able to access lower quality education. I mentioned the issue of no-fee schools that are quite prevalent in the Eastern Cape, and as a result, we've seen huge dropout rates because of this low quality education, and that is going to perpetuate inequality as less individuals are going to participate in the economy. So ensuring that education system is quality and reducing this inequalities in education is going to be quite vital. For us to actually see improvements in inequality, we actually need to see a reduction in this inequality in our education system. If you look at poverty levels, an increase if you look at unemployment, so an increase in unemployment causes a decline in inequality. Okay, this is also a bit unexpected. We've seen, we'd expect that if unemployment is actually increasing, we'd expect it to reduce inequality. Okay, but however, as I said, the unequal unemployment opportunities and also, the inclusivity of our economy is to blame in this case. So, employment levels are not really being translated to declines in inequality, which is one of the major problems that we're seeing. Since in line also with what we found earlier on, that, as the economy is improving, more people with job opportunities are expected to be created. But, these job opportunities are only accruing to it's just a small segment of the population. The rest of the population are not able to access these job opportunities because of this, our economy is not really too inclusive. So, at the end of the day, what's going to happen in most cases, if the economy is improving, employment opportunities, more people will not be able to access those opportunities, and that further increases inequality. Okay. So ensuring that our economy is inclusive is going to be quite vital moving forward. Okay, and then, the issue around investments and gross national income, these actually reduce inequality. Okay, so if you look at gross national income, is in line with the Kuznets theory, which suggests over the long term, as more people have higher levels of income, what we're likely to see is that inequality is going to decline to a large extent. And investments and improvements and issues around infrastructure, are also quite vital. Improvements in infrastructure are vital for reducing inequality. Yeah. Then the second part of the analysis looks at the threshold effect. So I'm just going to looking at the second research question, mentioned that inequality levels are actually to determine whether human capital is a positive or negative effect on poverty. Okay, so the effect of human capital on poverty levels is determined to a large extent by inequality. So what the results of the threshold model here suggest is that, if the Gini index, that's our measure of human capital, our measure of inequality, Gini index, our measure of inequality, if it's greater than 0.63, okay, then human capital is largely going to have an insignificant effect on poverty. Okay, so what this is basically suggesting here is that, for human capital to reduce poverty levels significantly, we need to see inequality declining below this 0.6315. Currently inequality in the Eastern Cape is around 0.7. So with these high levels of inequality, education attainment is hindered to a large extent, and what will happen here is that poverty will likely to be perpetuated over time. So we need to see a reduction in inequality for us to be able to see a positive effect of human capital on poverty. Okay, this is one of the most important findings, I would say, of the study. So inequality levels, has been shown again in studies that have been done in literature. They show that inequality is one of the major determinants of poverty. Even Stats SA, in 2019, a study by Stats SA showed that, inequality is one of the major determinants of poverty in South Africa. So for us to reduce poverty levels, we need to see a reduction in income inequality. We need to see more people being incorporated into the economy. We need our economy to be more inclusive. Then the last part of the analysis shows, well, I'm just going to show what are the determinants of inequality. Okay, sorry, this was supposed to be poverty levels. So a 1% increase in poverty actually, causes a reduction in the average years of education. Okay, so a very important finding here. For us to enhance human capital levels, education attainment, we need to reduce poverty levels to a large extent. So if poverty levels were to increase by about, by 1%, which represents about 70,000 people falling into poverty, what's going to happen in this case is the average years of education will reduce by 0.025. Okay, so it's quite imperative that we reduce poverty levels in order for human capital to actually increase. Okay. And you see here, if you just multiply this figure here, if poverty is if I explain it in another way, if we reduce poverty by about 10%, let me say about 10%, that means if we take out about 700,000 people from poverty, then the years of education in our economy will increase by about 0.25 for the lower, if you use the lower poverty line. And if you use the upper bound poverty line, then about 0.36, we'll see an increase in education by about 0.36. Okay, so this is quite imperative here. As I say, in the Eastern Cape, there's been discussions around how poverty levels actually hinders, human capital. So it's quite important that we see poverty levels declining to a large extent so that human capital may actually increase. There are also other determinants of human capital, such as access to phones and devices, which are going to be important as we move onwards, this fourth industrial revolution and digital or with this learning that is done digitally, distance learning. It's imperative that we ensure that individuals have access to devices. And as I mentioned earlier on, also access to issues such as electricity is going to be very important. So if you can see an increase in access to phones and access to even devices would actually lead to an increase in human capital. Okay, and also disposable income is quite imperative. An increase in disposable income also leads to an increase in human capital. Okay, so as a conclusion, the results show that human capital is associated with lower levels of poverty levels. Okay, so human capital is associated with lower poverty levels. However, at this stage, human capital is associated with higher levels of inequality. So, shown that human capital is one of the tools that have been earmarked to reduce poverty and inequality. With poverty levels, yes, human capital does reduce poverty levels, but when it comes to inequality, human capital is still is associated, as I said, with higher levels of inequality. So there's evidence here, that the effect of human capital on poverty is also determined by inequality, as we've just seen with the threshold model. So higher levels of inequality actually perpetuate poverty to a large extent. And we've seen the major variables that determine human capital from study income levels, reductions in poverty levels are actually quite vital for reducing, for increasing human capital. And also, access to devices, as phones and so forth is going to be quite vital, for human capital going forward. And lastly, policy recommendations, you can see human capital to be promoted to reduce poverty levels to a large extent. So ensuring access, especially to quality education, is going to be important. It's very important for the province, and also increasing disposable income and ensuring access to devices. That's going to be crucial for education attainment. Okay, so I can't emphasize the issue of quality of education enough. As much as we've seen in this study, it's one of the explanations that we can provide for why at times human capital may not reduce what we call this inequality levels, because our education system is largely unequal. So what we need to see to a large extent is, as outlined in the second point, we need to actually investigate one of the major possible causes of this positive relationship between human capital and inequality. Why is that? We're seeing the population is being educated. Yes, we're seeing that, but however, inequality is also continuing to rise. Okay, so this is something that needs to be interrogated even further. As I said, possible explanations for that is the unequal education system. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have a very high number of no-fee schools in the Eastern Cape. So it's quite imperative that we actually improve those schools. We need to see improvements in infrastructure of the schools, expenditures, and especially trying to ensure that the teachers are well equipped in order to impart knowledge on the students. Okay, and also, income inequality should be reduced as it perpetuates poverty levels. So I mentioned now inequality is quite important and it renders human capital ineffective. So if inequality remains high, what happens is more of the population is educated. What happens is, poverty levels will continue to remain high because of this inequality. Okay, there's also a need for monitoring and evaluation of, the expenditures in education to ensure effectiveness. So we need, as I said earlier on, education expenditures have not resulted in commensurate returns. So we need to interrogate the effectiveness of education expenditures. Are these expenditures reaching the people that are supposed to have this? Are these expenditures reaching, the individuals, the rural communities, there's no fee schools? Are those expenditures getting to those areas? Because that's one way in which we can enhance the quality. And once we enhance the quality of education, what's going to happen is, we'll see a reduction in poverty levels and also in inequality levels. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. My presentation comes to an end at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Moyo, for this very important presentation on the impact of human capital development on poverty and inequality in the Eastern Cape. Truly, these studies take us beyond the pure trend analysis to show us some empirical evidence provided through elasticities and coefficient and multipliers. I enjoy that part where you show the threshold effect of Gini coefficient when it's estimated above 0.63. Really, this was fascinating to me. And also enjoy your results that show that one extra year of education reduces poverty by 5.5%. This is really important for us to know. Like I indicated from the beginning, that the aim of this dialogue is really to fill the gap, an important gap that seeks to include empirical evidence in policy development. At this point of time, we're going to allow the participants to ask questions, clarity, and please indicate whether your question is for the first speaker, who Dr. Izu, who presented on the sectoral analysis of the impact of digital technologies on productivity and employment in the Eastern Cape. And the second presentation was by Dr. Moyo. They are both post-doctoral fellow at Nelson Mandela University. The second presentation that we've just had now was on the human capital development, their impact on poverty and inequality. If there is any question, clarity, or I don't know if we still have Prof. Mishi, the host, if there is any addition to the presentation or question, clarity, please, you are given the opportunity. I see one hand. Speckman, please go ahead. I see another hand by Nomonde. Glory, can you go ahead with your question? Can you unmute and go ahead with your question? Okay, let's give an opportunity to Nomonde. Nomonde, can you ask? Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you very much to the presenters for the insights that they have brought through their research. They will assist in a number of other spheres and in a number of other researches that we are still going to embark on. Just one thing that impacted on me or triggered a thought from the first presenter, that indication or that assumption that, okay, forgive me if I'm using the wrong term when I say assumption. 1 year of schooling will reduce poverty by a certain percentage. I mean, I will not be detailed, but the presenter will remember that they've indicated that 1 year of schooling will somehow reduce the number. What is the assumption there? I'm asking that of 1 year of what level of schooling? Somewhere between the two presenters, they have indicated the level of our education system, the inequality in our education system. So, I mean, maybe I need more detail in what 1 year of education will do to change the situation. Is it assuming that it will give one a better opportunity for a job, which is a debate of another day? Or is it that perhaps it enhances one's chances of getting to another level of education, assuming that there will be better chances of a job opportunity? Either way. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I don't know if you can hear me now.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. In fact, she's asking the question I wanted to ask because all the recommendations, I was trying to say I could not make the connection between that data analysis and those conclusions that had come out of Dr. Moyo's presentation, because is it the type of education, or is it just the 1 year that is added? Is it having electricity and cell phone, or is it that with something else that is happening around? Because the education we give is not entrepreneurial. It could be a degree, a PhD, and all of that. People still cannot create jobs. People are still unemployed with those PhDs and all of that. Should we be looking at how many years, or should we be looking at what type of education we give, and also what kind of enabling environment we create around the area here? And that was the question that I wanted to raise, Chair, because I'm struggling within my mind to make a connection between those two. I want to make an example. In the streets here in East London, you find a lot of people making bags, making belts and all of that. They are not South Africans, but it says something about the kind of education they received. I have a house in Pretoria. Most of the people that worked there, extended and all of that, come from Zim. The person would be able to do a tiling, they would be able to do carpentry and all of that. And I asked them, they say the education at the vocational schools is asking us, if you only are able to do brickwork and not able to do the carpentry, who's going to put the roof in your thing? Who's going to put the ceiling in the house you're building and all of that? Do we do those things here in this country, or do we do it differently? I just want to pause there, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the question. I don't know if there is another hand. Please, if there is questions, please feel free to ask before I hand over to our speakers. I think both questions are for the second presenter. Dr. Moyo, you're going to have an opportunity to respond.
Okay, thank you very much for the questions that we posed. Yeah, as I provided earlier on, the definition of human capital in this case is education attainment. Okay, so the education attainment is the proportion of the amount of education that the individuals aged above 25 have in a particular area. So we're looking at how much education does a particular proportion of the population have, those that are aged 25 and above. Okay, so for example, you could say, okay, on average, the individuals aged 25 and above, the average years of education is about 6 years. Okay, so it means on average, the amount of years of education that that population has above the age of 25 is only 6 years. If it's 9 years, then it means on average, those that are aged above 25, the average years of education is 9 years. So when we speak to the issue about an increase in the years of education, so what I'll be talking about there, I would say an increase, for example, in maybe from 8 to 9 years, for example, that's an extra year. So it means the proportion of the population aged above 25 having an increase in average years of education from 8 years to 9 years. Okay, so as I said, unfortunately, in most cases, those are some of the indicators that we have of education in that are available. Those are the best indicators of education. We would want, of course, yes, to have more data that will be able to assist us in answering research questions. But at the moment, you know, the available indicators of how educated our workforce is actually this data that I presented here, which is the average years of education of a particular of the population aged 25 and above. So it would have been best if that data was broken down, but unfortunately, you know, it's not broken down. So when we talk about an increase in the years of education leading to a reduction in poverty, so we're saying if the average years of education of the population aged above 25, if the average years of education actually increase, so that means more individuals having, you know, extra years of education. What's going to happen there is we'll see lower levels of poverty. And, you know, as the individual asking the question mentioned, it's assumed in most cases that as more individuals are educated, what's going to happen is it will enhance their opportunities. It will enhance opportunities. And as economies actually start improving, if our economy is to improve, you know, they'll have more opportunities to actually have jobs. But however, you know, as I said, you know, education is not the only determinant. There are other determinants, of course, that are linked to poverty and inequality. Okay, there are other major determinants, and also, you know, unfortunately, our data does not actually, you know, distinguish between, you know, quality and how if the education is quality or is not quality enough. Okay, if we're able to do that, it would have made our analysis much more clearer and much more simpler. But unfortunately, our data doesn't distinguish much between quality and, you know, lack of quality in our education. So as a result, you know, the issue of lack of quality in our education system is one of the, you know, the explanations that we provide for the analysis. So, you know, if we enhance quality of education of the population, quality of education, it's expected that individuals will have more opportunities, you know. And, you know, these indicators that I use here, they are used internationally as well. If you look at developed countries actually, if you look at the proportion of the people who are, the proportion of the population who are educated, it's quite larger. The average years of education is about 11 to 12 years. In South Africa, we only have the average is about 9 years or so. But in countries that are doing quite well, you know, the percentage of the education is quite higher for those who are aged 25 and above. So yeah, not too sure if I answered the questions adequately.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Moyo. And I want to...
If I may just come in, it might just be exactly that last point that we need to wrestle with. What we are using is the instrument that is used in developed countries for countries that are not so developed. And we are measuring things in the way they are measured there. We are saying even in developed countries, there's a lot of controversy about the role of education, the inequalities it causes, and all of that. And we are saying here, in a context where we are wrestling with the issues of development and all of that, we increase education, but not in a context that is conducive for people to produce and all of that. We're not only looking at human resources, we're looking at that for the economic development of our region and all of that. So it's just a comment. I don't expect an answer, Chair. I just want to say maybe we need to look at exactly what instruments we use, what models we use to analyze our own data. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, as I said, yeah, it's very true. We need to, you know, the issue of quality of education and the type of education is also quite important. Okay, as much as yes, we can have higher increases in education, but yeah, the type and the quality of education, as I highlighted, is very important for us going forward. Yes, Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the comments that we made.
Thank you, Dr. Moyo. I also want to indicate that sometimes it is very, very easy to do analysis, empirical studies on international levels and national level. But the data at the provincial level, it's very, very difficult. So sometimes when researchers do studies at the local level or provincial level, at a time we will be limited by the amount of data that we have available. So we need to bear that in mind. And as I indicated, that really the aim of this dialogue is to close the gap that seeks to include the empirical evidence in policy development. But we are having the challenge of implementing good models from developed and emerging countries to implement them at the provincial level due to lack of data. Teboho, I see your hand. Can you please ask your question, clarity, or input? Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kambale. I think the concern is a valid one, and it always comes up. It's easily solved by considering alternative data sources to do your analysis. For instance, the World Bank, I think, was it last year or 2019, released a very authoritative report on the difference between schooling and education. And it was a very damning report for South Africa, where the finding is that our learners go through schooling, but they're not getting educated. So this is where you find this controversy about this metric of 1 year of schooling increases the chances, because it's just a quantitative number. It's not qualitative, because schooling does not equate education, as some of the studies do find out. So some proxies that can give you the qualitative element of education. For instance, I like the ANA results, annual national assessments, because they test the conceptual grasp of a learner. They said, the conceptual grasp of concepts. I saw, for instance, one result, for instance, of a mathematical question. I mean, it was testing the logic, and it was very simple. It was saying 7 plus dash, it's 10. So then the learner would do the basic maths and say, okay, 7 plus 3 is 10. And then you would ask in reverse, and then you would say, so if 7 plus dash is 10, then 10 minus 3 is what? The learner couldn't get the correct answer. Something like that. I may not be exactly accurate, but it was just testing whether the learner can connect the initial response with the next question that's a bit more complicated, but that needs him to link the concepts together. And that's one measure of cognitive development of the learners. So I think this study can well be complemented by considering such data that look at the cognitive development of learners and those that go through human capital development. Then you can have a comprehensive picture. But in this way, you almost like have an econometric picture that does not give you the qualitative and real picture. But the study has its own value in showing that if you expose people to more time of education, you are likely to have good outcomes. Then you must pay attention to, during that time, what do you actually expose them to? Then that's another question that needs to be explored. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for those wonderful comments. I think the authors, they're going to include them in their final report. And this brings us to the end of our presentation. I don't know if Prof. Mishi, the host of the postdoc, has any additional comment or input. Dr. Mishi? Prof.
Can you hear
Mishi?
me?
Prof. Mishi, sorry.
Yes. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, no, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you also for everyone for the feedback. I think it was very much insightful also to hear also with those that deal with the processes of ensuring that there is development. They also provide input, and definitely the issues of measurement are one of those issues that it's all about data quality. I like what Cheboko indicated, that look, we have some database like the ANA and the like that would also help to even improve quality of the assessment, because data is very much critical. So it's also in the process of what surveys, primary surveys can actually be done, what kind of administrative data can actually be used, because I think we're seeing that in many countries also there's a growing increase in the use of administrative data. So once we unlock also the use of administrative data, it really helps to also get very much insightful findings that would help to guide and inform policy. So such kind of partnership and unlocking those opportunities is always handy. And definitely, I think it's very much true that level of education generally does not number of years in school does not really matter much. But so it really boils down to that issues of what improving the matrices and how we look at the data as well. And I think also one very much key takeaway is that we managed to also showcase how issues of inequality, poverty can really be tackled from different angles, from your investments, from your infrastructure and the like, which also dovetails with some of already the work that you see on the ground that the province is already doing. So there's already vindicating those kind of catalytic projects that the province will be implementing. So it shows that, look, if that is done, really it translates to addressing those issues of inequality and poverty. It's just a matter of what other nuts and bolts that still need to be tightened. So continued research in this particular space always come handy. And we really appreciate and thank also the partnership with ECSECC, that we can continue to look into these matters and having a more regional focused analysis that we interrogate things at a very much lower level, getting primary data, looking also into the informal sector and all that, because those are some of the things that matter, that 25% of our people, they are actually employed in the informal sector. But what can we do to unlock potential for growth there and the formalization where possible of some sectors? So those are some of the issues that we continue also to really grapple. And again, many challenges come out along the way. We see that some areas are affected by water crisis, some areas are affected by different other challenges. How then also that come as a stumbling block on the processes of ensuring development and addressing those key challenges. So it's constant engagement with the realities on the ground through these analytics that would also help us to move forward as a province. So there is really great potential, and we really appreciate also the feedback and input that come through. Thank you so much, Dr. Kambale, and thanks to everyone for participation.
Thank you, Prof. Mishi. At that note, we want to bring the dialogue to the end. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Izu and Dr. Clement for this presentation. The studies are well received, and thank you for the participant, for the comment. I think this is not a once-off event. Next week, on the 1st of September, we're going to continue with this presentation, and Dr. Tafatso will be presenting on the socio-economic effect of fiscal spending in the Eastern Cape. I encourage again the participant to come and listen to this presentation. And please, we need to understand that this is just an experiment that seeks to bring together the academic world to you people who are the expert in the industry. So we really appreciate your input, your comment, because it's in doing so that will start bringing some literature to the province, the literature that speak to the province, because most of the time we only read these good studies done by the IMF and the World Bank, but really tackling the issues at the local level, sometimes it can be challenging. So we need to start somewhere. That's why I really want to thank the university for collaborating with ECSECC in these studies. And I look forward for next week on the 1st for that presentation. Thank you very much to all the participants, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Colin. Bye.